Hey, long days and pleasant nights. Welcome back to A Walk Along the Beams, our Stephen King discussion about the Dark Tower series in its entirety. We are focusing on the Gunslinger Reborn issues or Born issues 1 through 7, the first arc in the Grandioso comic book series that Stephen King did with Marvel. Um, I'm going to introduce the panel. The guys that we got here, we're missing a couple, and one's on his way, and then we'll touch base with the chat, and then we're going to get started just like normal. Of course, I got my dude Steve, the voice White Walker here, and Comics to the Voice. And then I got Mr. Radit Arts, Aaron, one of my favorite artists in the community. And Trev, unfortunately, is under the weather for this one, but he is in the chat, supporting. And then we got Philtastic, who is on his way, and still a shout out to Namman. He's still in recovery. He is one of our Tab brothers. We do pray for him. I think about Namman all the time, so he's definitely sitting out on this one. But he's here in spirit, kind of. So let's touch base with the chat real quick.
Holy
Of
crap.
course, we got Trev and Spirit.
The tower.
Got Mr. Jerry the Jitterbug. Hey Jerry, how you doing? Thanks for stopping by,
Jerry.
man. Means a lot. We got Steve here. The
The tower.
omnipresent. Christina Payne. Hey Christina, thanks for stopping by. We got Tina. Hey Tina.
Tina, your OGness.
Right.
All hail.
And right now that might be it. And I'll highlight them as they come in. Um So we are talking about Marvel Comics limited series, Stephen King's The Dark Tower, and the first one being The Gunslinger Reborn. There are some reprints where the first issue does say The Gunslinger like Reborn. There's a little confusion on that. I don't, but it's basically The Gunslinger Reborn. Um, I have two issues with me, and predominantly the two issues that I have feature the like new material that they kind of added to the series, because this focuses on the book um, Wizard and Glass. It's the fourth book in the series. So the first issue is basically a recap from the Gunslinger. It goes all the way back to the beginning, and it's basically the recap of the story of Roland besting court and becoming a gunslinger. Ends with Stephen Deshane waking him at the brothel after he's been made a gunslinger, and he goes to celebrate. And then we have a letter from Ralph Macchio. Now, I can't tell you why we have a letter from Ralph Macchio. I know he's an esteemed Marvel artist, but as far as I could tell, it didn't have anything to do with the art or the story or any of the side stories or any of the side art. So I think it's just like a praise letter. Well, I mean, it's a fantastic letter. It's a great read, but I can't tell you why it's in here. It's one of the many mysteries. What's up, movie fan? Clips 18 plus. How you doing, man? Um,
I
so
think he
the
helped with the story. Richard Isenoff, you mean? Yeah.
no, Ralph Macchio. We actually the first letter we
Oh,
actually get, yeah, because I saw he did a lot of the art to the side stories and stuff. Yeah, Richard Isenoff. Okay, so no, Ralph Macchio actually in the first issue it's the actual like after the comic you get the letter from Ralph, and then you get the first official side story. And the first official
oh, I
side
see it.
story,
I see what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah.
can't tell you why it's there. I want to assume.
It's actually in the first page of my book. Well,
Oh,
yeah, first page.
oh,
Okay.
okay.
They put it at the
In
beginning,
the
did they?
trade, yeah, it was in the back. So in the first side story we get is actually called The Sacred Geograph of Midworld, and this is written by Robin Forth, and then we get the art from Ice Richard Isenoff. Okay, so the main comic is actually done by Jay Lee, script by Peter David, with like an over consultant overseer by Stephen King himself, with help with Robin Forth. It's like a long list of for the comic. um
And I've
so
followed Peter David ever since Spider Man 2099.
that and I'm drawing a blank at his name.
That's
Fix
just
it,
when
Joe.
I know I first remembered his name. What else did
What's
you
up,
say?
Enemy of the Storm?
From?
Fix it, Joe. The Gray Hulk.
Oh, Joe Fix It. Oh, okay.
Joe Fix It. Yeah, yeah, there you go. Bad with names, sorry. Um So, but okay, so back to the side story. I do like Peter David. I like his writing. And I will say this, the overall like comic, it is kind of beat for beat Wizard and Glass. I will say after like reading this and since we just read Wizard and Glass so close, it is a very fast paced, like sped up version. It's not beat for beat. They skip over a lot. The book even addresses this in the seventh issue because Cordelia's kind of skipped altogether until the seventh issue. And they kind of explain that the narrator of the comic is different from the, because the narrator in this would be Robin Forth, right? And so the narrator in the books is Stephen King. All right, we got Mr. Phil making it to the stage. Long days and
Hey
pleasant
Hey,
nights,
guys.
Phil.
Phil.
You
Hey
feel?
Phil,
everybody.
Phil,
Sorry
Phil.
about my delay there.
That's
Yeah, you're
okay, brother.
good.
We're just
Perfect
getting started.
time. What's up, Sid? Glad to have you stop by. Um,
And Robin,
anyway,
her
and we're
last
talking
name
about.
is her
Oh,
last
go
name
ahead.
is Firth, right? Furth. Firth.
Fourth.
Robin Firth.
I say it. I don't know fourth, but
Furth.
Fur.
Is it Firth?
I say fur,
Firth.
like
Firth.
fur, and then it's
Firth.
add
Firth.
th.
So
I
Robin
say
Firth.
I
Yeah,
always say
that's
I
how I
always
read it.
pronounce it fourth, but not actually like the pronunciation. I don't know. It's weird, but we'll go with Firth.
Okay,
Firth.
sure.
Firth.
I just thought it
I,
sounded weird.
I'm just that's how like maybe I pronounced it like this, and then I went to a con and met her, and then I can't tell you why
Oh, did she say the name like that? Maybe they
see. I'm
pronounce it that
thinking
way. I
it's
don't
it's
know.
like that. But it could be Firth, and I'm just mispronouncing it. Don't that names
That's
are
like James
funny.
Tynan, right? Is it Tiny
Mm-hmm.
Onion?
Mm-hmm.
Tiny Onion.
So Phil, just to catch you up, we are talking about the first issue. We haven't got too far into it. I was explaining that the recap in the comic is basically like a sped up version of Wizard and Blast. Like they kind of skip characters and stuff like that. They kind of hit the main beats, and that's pretty much it. Um, so the first side story is the Sacred Geograph Midworld by Robin Forth, and then it's just basically a story of Annie teaching the young gunslingers about the beams, and Gilead and its location to the beams. Like it's basically some world building stuff like that. Um, First side story is not that bad, I mean, it's not overbearing or anything, and it kind of gets you into these side stories. It lets you kind of get a hint of where we're going, kind of thing. Um,
I think
my
like what you were saying on Wizard and Glass is also is like Wizard and Glass was a long book, and this is very it is, even though it's condensed, it still takes the snippet of that long book, which is the flashback of Roland's past, and it really expands on it, and it
Yeah,
fleshes out more, and it adds more characters.
yeah, absolutely right, Aaron. And it fills in all the gaps because that's what we talked about before. These comic books fill in the gaps of
But it
stuff.
is like you said, it's fast paced because they're
Yeah,
being chased the whole time, so they're kind of like on the run. It's kind of like the Mad Max movie Fury Road. Like they're being chased the whole time, by the coffin hunters and by the people of the town. So it's a fast paced story.
my first question actually comes with all this, with expanding, adding these side stories, the lore, the world building. Um, does this alter or change your opinion on the main series? Does this add any flair to your excitement for the Dark Tower? Does it deter it, like adding too much, especially we're getting additions from Stephen King's second and I didn't even say this. Okay, so the comic is written in 2007. To give you the timeline, we had our last book was written in like I had it written down somewhere. So we had the last book written in 2004, and then we had the comic in 2007, then we had The Wind and the Keyhole 2012. So he did the comic in between. He did like technically book 4.5 or book 8. Okay, so it like for fans, it was kind of a weird thing, right? It was probably one of those things where he might have tweeted like, "Hey, we got more Dark Tower coming," and then we get this comic. Um, some of this kind of, I don't know if it changes your perspective of book 8 because we get a lot of information in this series kind of particularly pertaining to book 8, right?
It
Or
did mine. I,
mhm.
on book 8, when I read book 8 the first time, I thought the Crimson King was kind of silly. And then, when I read it in this, I I was totally creeped out. Like, he's way more scary in this, and I just like this version of him a lot more than the book.
Yeah, I could agree with that. I mean, in the final chapter when we saw the confrontation, and I think Trev felt the same way. It kind of just felt like it was like a bad video game boss fight, like a letdown. And it almost, at least the way it read to me, it almost felt a little cartoonish. This, and you could either credit Stephen King or you could credit Jay Lee or credit both of them. This was significantly creepier.
I mean, okay, so that is one of my other questions because in the second issue we do get to see a whole new especially for y'all, right? You get to see a whole new version of the Crimson King. And not only that, but a glorious Crimson King, right? Wouldn't you have loved this version of the Crimson King at the end of the book kind of thing
Yeah, look at how
versus like
creepy this fucker looks.
versus Santa Claus like and that's why like I had to put that timeline out there because you feel it's not a this isn't like a like a little known thing that fans were disappointed with the Crimson King, because I'm pretty sure every fan that made it to Santa Claus Crimson King was disappointed in not just one way. I want to say like 3 or 4 different ways just with the imagination alone. And we got a couple other people talking about. Let me stop and say hi to 'em. We got Mr. Kenneth Burrow. What's up, Kenneth?
Kenneth.
We got Utaka
Hey,
Tour Guy.
Kenneth
What's
Bird.
up, Utaka? We got
Yeah,
Mr. DJ Wise. What's up, James? How you
Hey.
doing?
DJ.
I will show you this because and we haven't got there yet, but the second issue we do get it's the first book where we do get like physical new scenes in Wizard and Glass because we get pages like this where
Yeah.
well we're like our dude Martin literally changes into Randall and goes to visit, the Crimson King, and the Crimson King is just leagues different. He's in a spider form. I mean, he's chilling with all his great, with all his rainbow. I mean, it's just a more formidable, more evil, more sinister. You know what I'm saying? The
Yeah.
kind of the bad guy of the series that a lot of us had envisioned, kind of thing. Um, that I guess so. Let's go with that because that's one of the. I mean, that's the question that I mean, that's probably the biggest question of this book. But with this edition of the Crimson King, like, like how does it alter? Why choose this version after you finish the book? You do the comic and then you give us this version of the Crimson King. Now, there are some theories I've kind of announced that a piece of this, and Steve just read that book recently, Black House, right? There are
Yep.
some books that do explain why we don't get this version of the Crimson King. But without those books, you're missing those information. You're missing that information. So to the common reader, you're just like, why didn't we get this version? I mean, this is the version I want, right? I mean,
Yep.
it's written. It's so
One of
easy.
the one of the descriptions of the Crimson King is he's the Lord of Spiders,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that Jay Lee really took that as like the main inspiration is his design for the redesign. He leaned more towards the were spider form of him, and in the book, I felt like it was more based on the Lovecraftian Yellow King. The
Mhm.
Yellow King in Lovecraft is kind of what the Red King is based on. Is partially based on him. And the Yellow King in Lovecraft, he's nothing but a robe.
Yeah.
He's just a giant robe, and that's kind of how I felt the book took that. But the comic is definitely more towards the were spider.
And to give credence to that, and Stephen King is a huge H.P. Lovecraft fan. That there is that I didn't really bring up a lot of Lovecraft, like the the similarities and stuff like that, but there are like the Thinnies is strictly an H.P. Lovecraft kind of homage, the tentacles and that kind of stuff. So there is a lot of that, and I can say that the basis of him being similar to the Yellow King, it is very true. I mean, so. What about you, Phil? What about you, Steve? What are your theories on why we got this version of the Crimson King versus the version we got in the book?
Well, I'll say this: when I first saw it I did kind of stop and think, okay, if we're seeing this big grotesque creature right now, why are we not getting that at the end? And the only thing I could come up with was remembering the fact that this takes place so far into Roland's past. By the time we meet the Crimson King, he's had the palaver with Martin that lasted for like thousands of years or whatever. He's got the long journey over there. The only thing I could associate it with was thinking of Mordred's, his trek across the land, and remembering at one point he thought he was too weak to be in his spider form. So that being said, maybe my only thought was maybe when we finally do see the Crimson King at the end of this story, he's very weak, or he's in a weakened state, and he can't go into his spider form.
You're
I will
so
say
close,
this though.
Phil. You're so close, man. I thought you were gonna do it. I thought you were gonna say it. Okay,
Then I'll
so
say it.
yeah.
Well,
Okay, so but
let me
you're
add
still
one thing though.
absolutely you're absolutely right. I mean, without the knowledge that pertains in other books, that's the version of the of Crimson King we did get this week. Like beaten down, like, and there are things that are added to that. But you're
Let
right
me
there.
let me add one thing though. I do kind of, and this might be a little off, so I'm sorry if I veer from the path a bit. I do think that they did make, as much as I liked seeing this version of Crimson King, I do think that they made a mistake showing him in full form this early in.
Yeah, showing
I
a lot of them. I
Yeah,
like when the villain is hidden. Like sometimes less is more.
Jaws,
Um,
perfect example.
yeah,
Create the
Yep.
the fear
mystery
of the
that,
unknown.
yeah.
But to give credence, remember this is like supposed to be read after like the fourth book. For reference.
Well, and that
No,
brings up
but
another question I'll save for later on though.
Steve, what you got before we?
Well, we got the whole multiverse thing, but if you remember in the books too, the Crimson King, when he was in his court, he was trying to figure out a way to make himself immortal or undead. So that's what he did. He was an undead state. So this is why he's all messed up at the tower there, because he's undead now. I don't think he can transform into his spider form or whatever anymore now, because he isn't even a living creature anymore. Now he's just undead. He's some kind of messed up version of what he was when they talked about that in the book.
Mhm.
Yeah, but then we got the multiverse thing, so there's more than one world, right? So which version of the universe is this one? And do they cross
Ah,
over? Is it a different version of the universe? So the Crimson King's slightly different in this one than he
so
is
that
in that one?
I was hoping somebody is this a different loop? Is the comic the next cycle after? Okay, and I'll paint this picture because there is something missing. One major element that is because there is a new element that they add, and I'm going to get there. But there is a major element that is missing out of the comic, and I was wondering if my Tet was noticing what element was missing from this series. Can anyone like there's a huge element in the books. It's something that
19.
Yeah.
yeah. For some reason, no numbers are featured within this book. Especially within this first arc. I went through every page, every line, and there are no number references, which if you've read this series, numbers are highly, I mean, through the book series, that's a major component.
Yeah.
The loop cycle being 19 is a major component, and the fact that this first arc does not feature any of that, it kind of gives you the maybe this is the next loop or previous loop, or like what if the reason that the Crimson King is so weak in the book is because it's the 19th loop, and this comic series is actually like loop 10 or something, and the Crimson King is actually still powerful, like he just every loop he gets a little weaker or something, and Roland gets a little stronger the closer he gets to his goal. No, but for the comic series, and Trev was saying it perfectly right here. I beg to differ, because that is after the books. We needed them to, gain interest, like having a little different. I kind of agree. I feel like that's the, because the first issue is pretty much straightforward. The book, there's no changes, no alterations. It is a sped up, like cut version of what we know, but there's no new. Okay, then you get to the second issue, and there's not
You
just
get a
one
little
new.
bit more with. Well, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead. Keep going.
Well, I
Second
was going to
issue.
say in the second issue, it's not just one new scene you get, it's several new scenes that are not featured in the book. We get scenes where we get conversation between Walter and the Crimson King, something that we don't get throughout the entirety of the series. You know, um, we get a lot of that, like one-on-one with the bad guys in the series, that we didn't get in the books. We get scenes where, well, we did get the Walter where he goes to talk to Latigo, but as far as like Walter going to talk to the Crimson King, or Walter going to talk like inside the grapefruit, none of that. Like, and we haven't even got to that part yet. What were you gonna say, Aaron? I'm sorry.
Oh no, I agree with that. That's just the pace is just it starts off really close to the books, and then as it goes, it expands and starts adding its own, taking its own liberties.
And that's Robin Firth for you too, because she is the right hand woman of Stephen King and the authority
Yeah,
on the Tower series. So he had the utmost trust in what she did for this whole comic book series. So she had a lot of leeway to put in all the little pieces in there.
But even like like I read, I didn't read all the panels. I think I read a panel and a half that they reprinted from Comic Con. And at one point, somebody had asked Peter David, "Hey, how is it? Did you have to adjust your style, that kind of thing?" And he said something. Look, at the end of the day, King approves everything that we do, and he said no problem with it.
Mm-hmm.
This reminded me a lot of how Lucas like did his earlier books and his dealings with Marvel and Dark Horse Comics in the beginning. Like, he would allow new writers and artists to come in and expand on his universe, but he still had the final say. He would read through it and make sure it
Mm-hmm.
fit. Well, I want to say that's exactly what Stephen King did. And with Robin, it just got to a point where, yeah, they were both in the same wavelength, on the story, where
Mm-hmm.
her additions were his additions, kind of thing. And I kind of agree to a point.
Yeah,
I
I
like
agree
the
with that completely.
I do like the possibility of different loops. When I originally read this, I will state that I did not read this as a different loop. I read this as like, this is part of the main series. This is just bits and pieces that we were missing. It's just something I threw out there, that this could be another loop, based on the facts that are in the book, that there are no features and numbers, and that is a huge element that's in the book that is completely missing. I mean, there is a
they
little bit to
they
talk about.
definitely. I think the book, it kind of alluded to the fact, it kind of it hid Martin a little more. Like you weren't really sure if Martin was the Man in Black in the books, but like in the comics, like it's like Jay Lee makes him a dark sorcerer, and like like he's the bad guy, he's evil.
Oh yeah, it's for sure. It's
So,
spelled out.
okay, that leads into another question. How did you feel about the art related to what you know from the book? Did it paint the right pictures, your imagination versus what's on the page in art form? Like seeing Rhea of the Coos, seeing Shimi, did that line up with your imagination based from the books, kind of thing? How did the art do in that form and that justice?
After the original quartet was not actually how I imagined. Yeah, Cuthbert,
With
he
Alec?
wasn't really drawn the way that I thought he would be drawn.
I think I like the way Kuth. He's not. He's not drawn the way I thought he was going to be, but I kind of like the way Cuthbert is. I think Alan is another like
I like
because
Elaine. I think they did good with him, but
I
like
think for me they were both
Cooper,
surprises.
yeah,
Steve,
Yeah, that wasn't the way I imagined them either. But then when I saw what Jay Lee did, I thought, yeah, that's really good work. I got no
love it.
problem with the way he drew them. You know, everybody has their own mind's eye. That's the thing about a book.
I really like how he did Roland.
But the problem is, as human beings, when you have your imagination, you can't really make up a face. So it's somebody it's based
Yeah.
on when you're thinking of it in your mind.
Yeah, and
Susanna was beautiful.
Mhm.
I kind of feel like I know what you're saying, Steve, because my thought when I was reading through it, not so much with the character design, but the action itself. I'm going to say this: I like Jay Lee's work. I felt like when you get further into the reading, the actual showdown between the Katet and the Coffin Hunters, I felt like something was missing. Like the action was a little bit more
I love the
difficult
way
to follow.
Jonas designed the red mask.
Yeah, that was cool. But I kind of felt like
Jonas, sorry,
Farson.
Yeah,
Farson.
I kind of felt like I understood
Jonas
more
was cool too, though.
what Alan Moore meant when he was like, you don't need to adapt my work into a movie because the way it exists is perfect. You do lose a little bit of your imagination into that. I was kind of spoiled going into the entire series when we started our reading because I remember saying, hey, isn't Urbsis Alba in the movie? So I found myself, even when we were just doing our normal readings, like, oh, okay, Urbsis Alba is Roland. That's the picture I have in my head. And that being said,
that.
Jay Lee is a talent all of his own. I think his strength is when he is doing the just kind of dark landscape. Everything kind of feels like it has a sense of.
I will say he's weak with backgrounds. Like you won't see a lot of backgrounds in his art. You'll just see color, and but characters are great. Character designs are awesome. Some of the background design elements, like the trees and stuff, like I like that. But
I think though that's kind of part of it because the whole time I'm reading this, I feel like this world is very bleak, and that I think kind of adds to it. I also
dying,
think
it's moving on.
right, and I also think having read some of the panel stuff, he was holding back a little bit to let Eisenov go in and ink his stuff because he even said in it, this is the first time I've had anybody ink anything in years.
Yeah.
But you know what it kind of felt like to me? His style was almost like, if you remember back in the day, the 9 Inch Nails video for Perfect Drug.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I felt like every panel.
I think he really, really nailed Roland. He really nailed Jonas. He really nailed Farson. He really nailed Susanna.
I want to say in character design that there's kind of no, because I think the character design and like there's only a couple like I want to say like the Crimson King, Farson, that really like had distinct change from the book. But as far as like
the main characters look good.
But I think, like for me, the art, it's set in more like because the Wizard of Glass is set up as like a star-crossed, Romeo and Juliet kind of this romance tale. So I want to say like the whole book adds to that for me because it does feel like this kind of like nightmarish dream type of, situation kind of thing where it's like,
And the colorist, I know we talked a lot about Jay Lee, but the colorist, I don't know if this book would be the same without the color being like it is. Like, it don't matter where you turn in the book, you know where you are just from the color.
Yeah, Richard did a fantastic job of coloring this thing.
Yeah.
Hey, comic collector. Me too.
Yeah, you need a good colorist. My wife hates reading these books because she doesn't want anybody to tell her what the characters are supposed to look like. So that's why she hates reading comic books, especially with Stephen King stuff and movies. She hates them because she wants to have them in her imagination only.
I can get behind that. And there's certain people that like, cut movies off at a certain point because that movie was perfect. How do you top that? So why the need of going forward? I mean, I can get behind that. To me, I like that we have. I mean, you don't have to read the comics kind of thing,
That's
but
what I told
I
her. I told her just read the stuff in the back, and that's what she's going
yeah,
to do. I said just read the blurbs. They
don't let
read
it
like a
affect your
novel.
judgment.
Yeah, and then that will just enhance the books for you, especially if you go back and reread the books. And with this knowledge on these comics in your head, it just makes the books even that much better.
To me,
At
in
least
my
that's how I
opinion, I
feel.
I appreciate the art and I like it. I like the character designs. They're pretty close to what is envisioned in the book, minus like, maybe Crimson King Farson, because in Farson we don't get really any picture of who he is, what he is,
He's
kind of
got the
thing.
mask on.
hmm Um, as far as like what I kind of appreciate the most from the books is the look of Midworld, like the creatures, because you did, yeah, a lot of that is foreign in the explanation in the books, and of course in this, I mean, there's not a whole lot in this first arc as far as like, what the outside, mages looks like. There's, because most of the backgrounds are like Aaron said, they're just it's the focus is on the characters
Blurry.
in the foreground. Um, but it's stuff like this, like Walter walking through a door that he drew, like that I can appreciate because they're described within the book, but it's kind of like you do have a mental picture, but is it lining up to what exactly Stephen King's trying to, get across as far as what's written kind of thing.
Hmm.
So I can appreciate stuff like that, like the rook skull. Like I don't know if anybody like physically knew, how big a rook was or what a rook looked like, because they're actually pretty big birds.
Yes, they are.
Um, all right, so back on top, but I want to say for me, I do appreciate the art that's within it, but I could totally understand like your wife, like not wanting this to affect the judgment. But like you had explained, like read those side stories because
Yeah.
I feel like each one of these side stories is just it adds glam to the whole story, and
Oh,
it's so
big time.
nice. Um, Right. So okay. Let's so we're issue 2, new scene with Martin talks with the Crimson King. It's a brand new scene where we get this scene with like Martin and he goes to talk to the Crimson King. We get a new scene with gunslingers in this book. We also get like a mention of a gunslinger from the past called Thomas. It was one of the like new mentions of a gunslinger that there's nothing to it though. They just mention his name and that hey, he was there with Roland and the crew in the beginning. Um, in this story, we do get to see the gunslingers try to arrest Martin, which we didn't get in the book. After the whole, which was kind
Yeah,
of
like what
interesting.
happened to him? It was right. There was
Yeah,
no conclusion to that. There was no resolution. Where the hell did he go?
yeah, in the book, it just kind of like fades off, and we know he appears later, but there's many times in the book where he just kind of does that. It's
Yeah,
just
he just
like.
shows up. Like, okay, where the frig has he been? What's he doing?
So I do appreciate that these are the scenes that I feel like fans of Dark Tower need to read this comic for because not only are they great additions, but they do kind of fill in some of the major gaps. Like okay, with Steven knowing that, his magician is this, traitor, that, Gabrielle ends up dying. There has to be this huge commotion going on. Gilead, what the heck, and we do get this scene where they do try to apprehend him. And it's such a dope scene. Walter's like, yeah, you losers, I'll see you later,
Yep.
suckers.
Draws the door and he disappears, and they're looking around. Where the hell did he go? Actually,
Right.
well, what he did to those guys that tried to capture him
Okay,
was funny.
so here's another takeaway from that. We didn't get a lot of this in the book either, but it's also a scene when we get to see Martin physically using magic.
Yes.
He like not only does he use it to like take out most of the soldiers that come, but he also uses magic to just draw the door and fade away.
Yep.
Um, I
Man, when he
will.
kicks that pug, it just makes you want to hate Walter even more.
He
I
transformed
laugh.
into the guys that go to arrest him. He transforms them into pug dogs, and then he
Yeah,
takes one and he kicks the dog.
kicks him.
So it's like, you dog kicker, you bastard, you.
And that's actually a line from the book. Remember, that's actually in Wind in the Keyhole. Someone calls the tax man a dog kicker. Okay, so I love these new additions because, and it's kind of funny because in the first book, there's absolutely no new additions as far as the comic. The side story, you could say it's kind of, but it's just basically like, I will say the side story is more like it's the first time we get real information about Vanny besides Roland telling us about Vanny. No,
Yeah.
it's the second issue where we really get like, we get the scene with the Crimson King, and then we get this whole scene where the soldiers try and go apprehend Martin. These are not in the books. They're brand new. I love this. I don't know about you guys. So what did y'all think about the new scenes, Phil?
I thought the scene in particular with Martin was smart because it made him just ever more devious, not just for kicking the dog, but you think about it here. Everything that we know about the Crimson King and Martin and anybody working with him is they're very bloodthirsty. So he could have, these guys could have came in and he could have just been like, all right, bam, and they just explode into a big explosion of blood and guts. But no, he transforms them all into dogs. Why? Well, these dogs are going to run away. So you're going to say somebody's like, hey, what happened to this crew that came out? Can't find them. Don't know what's going on with them. It's almost like they disappeared and deserted. So rather than incriminating himself into, yeah, I killed these guards.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just
It's like,
builds
oh,
himself up as
they're
even
gone.
more powerful.
Yeah.
You're right. More mysterious. Yeah, I didn't even think of that part. That's cool, though. They'll just find a bunch of empty clothes with no guards in them and a
Right.
bunch of
And, I,
dogs running around.
and on that point, I kind of like that because you already have this bad guy that we know is not the main bad guy, and if he has all this like huge magic power that he could just like bam explode, and I mean it would be like, I mean, you're talking about what's the point of Roland going up against with this dude just could explode people. So I do like that they kind of like have a more funny toned down version of his magic, like you said, and most people probably wouldn't think of that, like, why did he turn him into dogs versus just killing them kind of thing.
Mm.
And Trev saying it. Great point. Yeah, it is. What about you, Aaron?
I like that. I like what Phil said. That's real cool.
Steve?
Yes, that was freaking awesome. I love how they make him look that sinister, and yeah, exactly, finally like utilizing magical powers where before he was just talking and doing his little devious schemes here and there, but now actually using some of that prim power or Gan power, whatever you want to call it.
He darkles and thinks.
Now that's the only I don't remember if they actually even resolved that. I wonder if he had a little piece of Marlon's mirror in him too.
We
So
don't,
that's how
because okay, so that is a
when we
big
get to
one.
that part with the
Yeah,
coups
yeah.
and how she gets her powers.
Because it is kind of interesting that the book explains specifically those two characters, with the laughing mirror. But that is okay. So,
Yeah,
okay, so we do get to a whole nother scene right after that, and maybe people skipped over it, but it's actually one of the mistakes in continuity. And I gotta guess. Oh,
we
that's right.
lost
It's
Aaron.
showing me some stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, I did.
Sorry, I hit the wrong button. I was trying to had to zoom in the pug.
There's the
All
dog.
good.
See,
All
look at
good.
that, punting a pug.
Right. He's
Son of
like,
a
yeah,
bitch.
yeah, boop. When I read it, I had the sound effects and everything with it. I was like,
And hearing the dog go, hey,
Mm. All right, so we get right after that, right after they try and so we get this scene where, Steven is sending Roland off to Magus and is explaining what he's supposed to be doing. But if you remember this scene, which okay, and I'm trying to find this page specifically. I'm in the wrong book. That's why. Okay. In the book, this scene is explained as far as Stephen is in the castle sending Roland off. In this scene, it is shown that they're outside, but I could forgive that, right? Maybe, okay, so the biggest continuity error here is Stephen Deshane actually, like, tells Roland to look out for the oil tankers and the grapefruit. And in the book, we know that he didn't learn that until later on, like as they were going on. They didn't exactly know what they were looking for. They were just told to go to Mages, do some counting. Roland did know that they had some Forrestan connections, but as far as like the tankers were concerned or the grapefruit, that's not mentioned until later in the book, like almost the end of the book, like when they're passing pigeons and stuff like that. It's not a huge error or anything like that, but it is the first time in the book when we get like just like a different way that they receive information. I won't say it's an error because you can look at it at different, maybe no, but I will say this piece of information does come at a different point in the book. Like it's specifically he's received through the carrier pigeons, after they start receiving more information on mages. But in the
But
first arc,
look at it from Roland's point of view. Okay, he's going to this town, but he has to play the role of a different character, Will Dearborn, and they're all playing the role. So they got to kind of dumb themselves down and act like they're surprised to see all this stuff, even though they have the information in advance. So perhaps they're just playing it dumb in the books. So the continuity would be fine in the comic books.
that's kind of the
They
way I
also
was
knew
looking at
about
it.
Diago too, right? They knew what the horse guy to go to, Susan's dad.
Aha, that's the next
That's
part.
another one, right?
Yes, okay, so we get to, and that's coming
Pat,
up.
was it Pat Diago?
Yes, Pat Delgado.
Delgado or whatever. Yeah.
Okay, so we get this scene, and it's a little further. So after Roland gets sent by his father, and there's a couple other scenes like that happen in between, and that's when we meet Jonas for the first time, basically. I do love the way they draw Jonas. Actually, the way they draw Jonas, Roy, and I'm drawing a blank at the last guy's name, but it's actually the way I envisioned all three of them. Like I thought they did a great job with their
I was
like
gonna say, yeah, it's spot on to the way I envisioned
yeah.
it too.
And especially all the scenes that they do with the coffin hunters, they're pretty much spot on, like in the book. Like, like all the encounters that they had are the same major encounters and stuff. Um, okay, so right after we meet Jonas, they jump back over and with our quartet, and they stop in the town of Ritzy, which is not so ritzy. Um, but this is when in this Roland meets a weed eater and he gets information about Delgado, and Roland finds out that Pat Delgado is actually deceased at this time. Okay, in the book that is not revealed until like he meets Susan, and not even at that time. It's like a little later after they get into the counting is when they find out that their informant that they're supposed to meet, Pat Delgado, has deceased. Um,
And
so that
how he
goes,
died too. Who killed
uh-huh,
him?
uh-huh.
Right? They explain that it's the coffin hunters that killed him.
Yeah, because in this, like in the book, it's more mysterious. Like
Yeah, it's an
Susan does
accident,
not.
and that's what
Yes,
Susan keeps saying. It was an accident. He saw a snake or his horse jumped or whatever.
yes, and in this, it's more like plain and cut. It kind of like, hey, the coffin hunters kind of, that
Hunted
they
them down
killed
and
them.
killed them. Right?
Now,
Yeah.
now, Susan does state that she still thinks it's an accident, but it's like this paints two pictures, where it's like everybody else knows that it wasn't an accident, and Susan's just the one that's deluded. In the book, it was different, where everybody was on the same wavelength. Nobody knew. It was a pretty kept secret and I forget who did it. It's like Mayor Thorne's counselor or whatever. He's the one that orchestrated. I forget his name.
Yeah.
Say hi to Tricky's World. What's up, Tricky's World? Not Old Man Logan. This is the Dark Tower. It is Marvel, but just different book.
Yep.
Any thoughts in the difference in the continuity? Does that, rereading this, especially getting to the second issue, and we have new additions, and then we have some continuity flaw, or some worked around, like could be continuity flaws. You'd have to like because it's like the weed eater. We do find out in the book that Roland did come across this weed eater, but it's not explained until Roy DePape makes his journey, makes it
Going
to this,
back. Yeah.
finds this town, and that's when we find out that, oh, this weed eater did meet Roland and stuff. Does this change anything on the book, like especially having to think about these two bits of information kind of thing?
Well, I
I'll
thought
start.
that the whole. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, you were the person I was going to be in one of the
Okay,
new readers.
there you go. It works. I was thinking that these continuity flaws or changes weren't so much accidents as, hey, look, we're abridging a lot of this story. We want to get some more of the action scenes to hit these main paces by a certain number of pages, certain number of issues, what have you. So maybe they took some smaller details or that would have taken a lot longer to explain properly and said, all right, this is what we're going to do. We're just going to mention it here so that later on we can do something else with it to make it more interesting, at least in their mind, to comic readers.
Actually, I think you hit it right on the point because we do know that a lot of these things play out, and you will see it. Some of these they don't hit on in the first arc, but they are like predominant big time in the second arc. Um, what's up, D-Naz? How you doing? Thanks for stopping by. And we're talking about the Dark Tower, specifically the comics, the Gunslinger Reborn, issues 1 through 7. No, and I think that's exactly what this is. He's, it's like they're kind of making it a little different for it, so it's a new viewing. At the same time, it's stuff that is we do find one of them at the end of this book. Or it's not something that we have to wait too long on, but it is stuff that they're like setting up for future use, kind of stuff. I was gonna, go around the corner, but I think Phil hit it perfectly on
Good job, Phil.
right.
Thank
You
you.
did it.
Because a lot of this is a huge, like, if you go read reviews about the book, this is one of the huge like complaints from fans of the series. And I did do some due diligence, and there's about 50 complaints on Amazon about there being continuity issues within the series. But
But
to
are they
me, they're
really
not.
that bad? Like, I mean, if you think
I
about them,
don't
they
really
could really
see
be
him
played
as
into it.
I don't really see him as continuity errors. It's
No.
like you said, you have to use a different
Almost
way
like
to think about it.
continuity fixes instead of continuity
Yeah,
errors,
Yeah.
Yeah.
exactly.
or
Little, yeah.
continuity rethreading.
Hmm.
So let's get to it because the second story, the second issue, the side story in the second issue is where the meat really gets going. I mean, the comic is great. We get some new additions, stuff like that, but basically it's something that we have read, know pretty well, kind of thing. All right, so we get to Merlin's Rainbow, and it's a story about Merlin and being an agent of chaos, and him
Hmm.
making the rainbow to bring chaos back within the world because at this time it was just nothing but Garen's light and the world of white. And the story about Eld, the Crimson Queen. We get some like a story about rape, birth of the Crimson King, and like a kind of a prototype version of Roland in that story, like a prophecy and like a prototype version in a like fantasy dream. Okay, so the biggest question here. During the Dark Tower, it's pretty much predominantly that it's like the red versus the white. And we do have elements of chaos within the book. That was some of our explanation on Walter's doing stuff like that. But it's never
Yeah.
really like talked about as an agent of chaos. And we just read through book 8, which reminding you came out a lot after the series, right? And the focus of half of that book was Merlin. Okay, so in those stories, Merlin's kind of a good guy, right? But in this series, Merlin is, I mean, his origin, he's one of the Prim monsters. He's
Yep.
not just, he's said to be one of the first demons that was released within the Prim that walked around because okay, so the, we get that's one thing. We get the explanation of how Midworld is, and it's basically a saucer. They do have that flat Earth theory
Yeah,
in
the flat
Midworld
Earth theory. Yeah, yeah,
where they could walk off the edge. And in this theory, that they have Midworld, and all around Midworld, the edge where you would fall off is the Prim, right?
yeah,
And all these demons and stuff came from the Prim. Merlin being born from that, and he actually was one of the first demons that took on a human form and was able to like
mess
actually
with people.
mess with people because he looked like human.
Yeah.
um Okay, so does this change your opinion on Merlin? Like after we read that whole story about Merlin and Tim, and like, I mean, there's a lot of backstory in Merlin in this. And granted, this is before we got Winning the Keyhole, but
And it kind of, to me, it just, it gave Crimson King a lot of motivation. For his motivation is chaos. He wants chaos. It's that theory of building a sandcastle and then smashing it when you're done because it's fun to smash. He just wants to have fun. For him, it's fun to smash reality.
Phil, what you got?
Yeah, I didn't think about what we read about Merlin in that final book, to be honest with you, until you just read it. It kind of shocked me when I was reading the backstory. I just read it a couple hours ago. That, again, Merlin was being described as, not a great guy, just as you said, an agent of chaos. And the only thing I could think of, kind of going with the same thing that we have with the Crimson King, is that maybe sometime between the creation story and the point where we meet Merlin at the end of the series, being that it is chaos, you could be an agent of it, but you can't control it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe something that happens or has happened has fundamentally changed Merlin's motivation.
I like that.
Only thing I could really think of, I don't like the alternate universe theory.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's an easy scapegoat. I kind of saying what Trev was saying earlier. But I feel like that makes more sense that, throughout this chaos, maybe it's just messed up so much. It's kind of like, well, wait a minute. Chaos is great, but now it's kind of screwed me up somehow. That I've wound up in this cage.
I like that. Steve, what you got? What knowledge you got?
I found Merlin when they described him in the end of this book about what I thought of him in the first place. So it wasn't really a big surprise. It was kind of cool. They expanded on the story. Chop and drop. I knew he was a chaotic being to begin with, but then explaining where he came from and everything, that makes way more sense now.
Mm-hmm.
Where he got all his powers from in the first place, transforming into a human form and just sowing all the chaos, right? Because he could be whatever he wants. He can come in the guise of somebody that's trying to help and be good. And next thing you know, he flips and does the exact opposite. It's an awesome character.
The whole concept of Merlin's grapefruit and the magic that's held within, you have to know that this is the omnipresent being that created these things, almost God level kind of thing. So getting his backstory and I love it. Especially because there's so much detail into his backstory. You know what I'm saying? Aaron, what you got? What you got, buddy?
Yeah, I thought of went through the keyhole a little bit. Is how changing forms and everything. But yeah, it was cool. It was a cool extra expansion. I think it adds a lot to Merlin. I like thinking of it through that way.
So I always took it like this. We got this Agent of Chaos, right? And we know, from these side stories, we're getting to learn a little bit about Merlin and some of the things he's done and stuff like that. But then we skip like possibly 1,000 generations and we meet him again, right? But how we are introduced to him and how we at that time and how he's told, like d- basically the way I took it was he was that agent of chaos, and it lines up with kind of like what Phil was saying. And something happened, changed. And, well, we do know something that happened. We have this dude Walter that came along, or the Crimson King, the Hermit that came along and tricked our agent of chaos, and the White had to come along and save this dude. All these years later, it took this innocent boy to show up and show Merlin that there was some good within the White that he had hated, and all these years kind of thing. So I want to say, as far as it lining up to everything I know about the character that's established in the book, it perfectly does, especially with the explanation going into the stories about the old people and stuff like that. And I thought I love it, especially this first story that they get into with when they really get into Merlin's backstory kind of thing, Merlin's rainbow, and how and why he created him kind of thing. Um, I it the origin of Crimson King. It's not something that's highly talked about in the series. It's kind of like the mysterious figure. And I also like that the hearing that most of these creatures from the Prem are insect-like, and having this Crimson Queen, that birthed the Crimson King, I mean, that also lines up with everything we know, kind of thing. All right, so moving along, we got issue 3, and Roland and Susan kiss and then depart. Roland and Ted go to dinner. Meet Mayor Thorne and Jonas. Later, we got a bar scene with the triple Mexican standoff, one of my favorite scenes in that book. Um, we get the apologies and we get some threats from Jonas. The backstory is the Guns of Deshane tells the story of Arthur Eld wielding Excalibur and 2 guns, becoming king of all world. 12 years later, after becoming king, Arthur takes on a quest to kill a giant snake, Seta. Losing 10 men and his 2 guns, he sacrifices Excalibur to make the Guns of Eld. My question's going to go into this book particular. I love this story, The Guns of Deshane. And I will touch base on the comic real quick. This issue, there's nothing really new. It's exactly like what you know from the book, kind of thing. But then we get to the side story, and the side story is just, the basic origin story of Roland's 2 guns, how they came into existence. Like, we get a lot more lore into Arthur Eld. It's kind of the first time, like, in these side stories that they touch base with them. What did y'all think about the origin of Roland's guns? I'm gonna ask now, Aaron. Phil, you're gonna be my go-to. And this one, what'd you think about that? Like, did we need an origin on the guns? Like, when you were reading that, did it? No, just go into it. Go into it.
I mean, did we need it? No. But I'll say this.
Hi, Joe.
Whenever you're dealing with a prequel, it can go one of 2 ways. It could either really flesh out something about a character, or you could be left at the end like, did I really need to see this? Do I really need to know this? This feels more like backstory. In the case with all of these backstories, I felt like they were done well, where it was like, yes, you're adding to the lore, you're adding to the legend. I loved this part of this backstory in particular. I thought it was the best out of all of them. I almost felt like, particularly the scene with the snake, I felt like I wanted to actually have read that in the actual book, or actually would have seen that in some form.
Visual repetition.
Yeah. In fact, I was actually questioning, have they ever referenced the snake before in any of the books? No. I felt like I had heard about it at some point. Either way, no, I really liked it. I like how they basically drew the line between, said, hey, look, even though Arthur's bloodline does not necessarily go to the gunslingers, which is an interesting kind of twist in itself, he is still with them in the form of his guns.
What about you, Steve? What'd you think about that?
I liked how they explained, like you said, with the acid melting the guns, but I liked the story about how he wouldn't let any of the blacksmiths, Manny, or scientists, or anybody to examine his firearms.
Yeah, even
not until they got melted and destroyed, and then he finally broke down and said, "All right, we need to make a bunch of these new guns." Right, because everybody had this superstition where the old ones who destroyed the world in the first place, they, any of their technology and weapons and anything were a big no-no, and everybody was to stay away. That's kind of why this whole Midworld is in kind of a Western vibe to it, because none of these weapons, none of that technology, electricity, none of that stuff was ever being touched, because all it did was cause death and destruction. So, the Eld, he wanted to make sure that, nobody got their hands on this stuff. But it was really cool how they explained all about how the guns, they possibly came from another world, and they wanted to examine them so they could create other ones. But he said no until they got destroyed. And it's like, all right, now we're going to take the sword and try to make it the same metal, right? That was the other thing, too, learning the metallurgy of the weapons.
Yeah, because cool. It was a foreign metal as well.
Yeah.
Aaron,
cold blue steel.
Yeah, cold blue.
Yeah, I liked them. I liked all of the backstories. Yeah, learning about the guns, why they're so powerful, and all. Yeah, it was all done well, in my opinion.
I absolutely love this story. I wouldn't say it was my favorite out of these side stories, but it's definitely my second favorite. I want to ask if anybody was like when they were reading it, like because the first part of that story, I want to say the first 2 pages of the script or whatever.
It would have been
Anybody
cool
else?
to see it in comic form, like if they had actually
Yes,
like
a bunch of
gave
these I
some
would love to
visual
see.
representation.
A bunch of these I would love to see in comic form, like especially
Hmm.
the Rhea. Oh my God. Um, okay, so when y'all were reading this, did anybody notice did it like did it scare y'all with the continuity error when y'all were reading this? Because in the beginning of the story, Arthur Eld is introduced with Excalibur and the 2 guns, and we reading the book, we know that Excalibur is the 2 guns, and that doesn't happen till the end of the story, you know. And I remember reading this, and I was like, wait a minute, that's not how it happens, you know. And eventually it is the story of how the Excalibur is melted down into those sword, you know, into those guns or whatever. But did anybody like even catch that when you were reading it? You know,
I just
Steve? Yeah,
took it
okay,
as
okay.
the
Yeah,
I
I
gun
don't
that
think
he
I
had
caught
wasn't
it.
powerful enough.
yeah, I caught that, but then as I kept reading, I'm going, okay, they're gonna have to fix this because I was thinking exactly the same thing as you. I'm like, how the hell does he got the guns and the sword? And then when the snake melted it down, I went, ah, that's it. Okay, that makes sense now.
Same.
Or they might
Okay,
have caught themselves and said, okay, we better fix this.
um, so good. See, it caught my train of thought. Um, all right, so we'll move on. I think I had another question. I just lost it. But I got another one related to this, but we'll go on to the next issue. But so we move on to the fourth issue. Roland and Susan love Blossom. Roy DePape finds out about the gunslinger. That's when he goes back and talks to the weed eater and gives him his prize of lead. I love that scene. Walter makes a visit to Latigo. Roland and the Tep visit the Thinny, uncover Sicko, and Mare advances on Susan. This is also another one of the books where we get some new scenes because the whole Thinny conversation with Roland and the crew is similar but a little different, you know. In this one, it's more like a conversation with the Thinny. In the book, it's more like it's just thoughts that are compelling them to go forward, kind of thing. I won't say it's different, but it is, you know, kind of thing. Um, but we do get to the next side story, and it's the Laughing Mirror Part One. Story of creation and Merlin. Merlin trying to cast dark in the world, makes a mirror from Gan's tears, takes the mirror to the dark tower. The mirror breaks in this attack. Merlin spreads these pieces throughout all the multiverse, the omniverse. It explains kind of like how chaos and evil was spread into this world of white kind of thing. This is also the first book that features well, um, no, I forgot to mention this. Issue 3 also features a panel, a Stephen King panel, where it's the Marvel, you know, artists, writers, editors, and stuff talking about how the series was made. I really didn't focus on that because it's just really, you know, like, hey, we love Stephen King. Hey, we love Marvel. You know, there's not really a lot of information in those panels. It's cool to read, and especially because it's like, I mean, this is in 2007 or whatever, you know. So I mean, it's a nostalgic kind of fade away because there's some Stan Lee stuff in there, and but there is an ongoing Stephen King panel. This is part 2 in this book. Um, but I didn't really focus on. There's no Dark Tower information in that. So my question goes into the second story, but it's related to all of them, and we're going to talk about Robin Force writing because she does the main script with Peter David in the comic series, and she also specifically writes all the side stories that we get throughout issues 1 through 7. Um, we've kind of already said this, but for those of y'all that don't know, Robin Forth is Stephen King's second in command when it comes to the Dark Tower series. She is Stephen King's aide, like, and not just on this series, but I mean, a lot of different books that he does. But she was granted the ability to write all these side stories to expand lore with Stephen King's consent, kind of thing. Um, how did y'all feel about her writing compared to Stephen King? The differences, you know, was her writing so like hard or heavy to get into? Did it fit right in, kind of thing? Did it feel like Stephen King's writing? You know, thoughts on that? And I'm gonna go with you, Phil.
I thought it fit in. I wouldn't say it was in the same vein. Like I did feel like it was, and this is probably going to sound harsher than I mean it to sound. I felt like it was a distilled version of his writing, and it makes sense because look, you already have all of the tools that Stephen King has put out there in place for the tower. You know, whether it be the birth of Mordred to the fact that okay, you've got these evil forces in the world. Um, it makes sense that you're going to change or create these origins that fit into this greater scheme using those same tools. It did give me a little bit of pause because, like, especially the way that they described the tower in itself, almost as like a living thing. I hadn't really thought about that the entire time we were reading the book, so that kind of gave me a different perspective. Um, and I always kind of the way this story in particular, the Laughing Mirror, it did kind of change my outlook on the entire tower because the entire time we were reading the story in the novelization, I always thought of the tower as a neutral thing. It's the flag at the top of the flagpole. Mario has to grab it at the end of every stage. Whereas here, it almost cements it as, hey, this is the opposite of the red. The red is actively trying to destroy this. And yes, they're trying to unseat the world, but the tower in itself, I also never thought of it as its own defense force. So
We do get that in these stories, right? We do learn
yeah,
that the tower. I mean, we got okay. You're 100% right. I want to say this does add and paints a new picture as far as the tower is concerned, because in this series, it is like the embodiment of Gan. Gan's like, kind of like a God to Jesus Christ metaphor kind of thing. We have a God and then we have like his living body kind of thing. um that's not really expressed in the book. You could kind of see that, but it's never said. So this does paint a new picture in that regard. Especially with the white and the red in the books. There is no reasoning on why the red is either trying to get to the tower, take the tower. It's just something that they're doing. It's evil. It's bad. This kind of paints a different picture, like more like, especially with the addition of the Chaos Agent kind of thing.
I'll
So
say
I
this
want,
though. I'll say this though. Sorry, just to add.
yeah, you could.
The only thing I really didn't like about these backstories was the fact that you needed these pieces of the mirror to have some of these characters turn evil. Like I much better kind of like the perspective when I was reading the novel is, well, they're evil because they're evil. They're evil because this is just their way of being. Or maybe they're not evil. Maybe Roland is evil and they're actually the good side. You don't know. You're just reading the story from Roland's perspective. The, now you tend to think of some of the things the Crimson King was doing. I'm going to lean more towards the evil explanation.
And you're on all points tonight, Phil, because that does go into another question I have related to the Laughing Mirror. Why the need to explain these two specific evils, like Jonas and Rhea of the Coos, especially when in the book there's no like question about their villainous, right? Jonas is a bad guy, he's leader of the coffee, he's doing bad guy thing. Rhea is, I mean, if not one of the bigger villains in the series, like, I mean, she's one of the cooler ones too. Like, but why this need to explain, especially while reading it, I do love both stories, but I felt it odd that they felt the need to explain why these people were like this. Like my envision of Rhea in the beginning, like, when we meet, it's just she's just an evil person. Like she had
Mm-hmm.
been like that, like she operated like this, and even in the backstory, it kind of lines up with your imagination, right? She was born like that, but like what was the saying that the side story used, like bad seed, warp tree kind of thing? Yeah, I mean, it, it, did you feel like this was a need to explain these two evils, especially in the way that it was like, oh, they just weren't born evil. Yeah, they stepped on this piece of glass or they got cut by this piece of glass and that made
Yeah,
them evil.
I mean, the only as I said, I think that you kind of detract from them a little bit. Like in the example of Jonas's story, I thought it would have been much more interesting if maybe he got a glimpse somehow of the grapefruit, and that's caused something in his brain to short circuit and become evil, or his ambitions took over, that type of thing. Because we all look, as much as we like a hero story, we all like a fallen hero story, and that's
I like how they
paint
did it in the comics. I like how they did this with Merlin creating this mirror because he wanted anybody to gaze on it would see the opposite, and he wanted to destroy Gan, so he brings it there, and then of course it gets destroyed, and it tries to. It almost takes out the tower, messes up the foundation, and then all the pieces get scattered to the multiverse. And they explain about these people being somewhat evil, except for Jonas. I mean, he was just an arrogant shithead, but then when he stepped on the piece of glass, and then it made him like totally evil. But with Kuz, they explained that she was already evil, and when she got the glass in the eye, it just manifested into magical powers for her.
I'll say this though, the one thing that kind of did linger for me about the whole fact that you step on a mirror or the shard and you become evil. Do you think that they made it this way as an intention to kind of tie it into what happens to Shimi, where, you know, the next time we see Shimi, he steps on a piece of broken glass, and that leads to his undoing or his death in even his most heroic moment.
Yep.
Phil, again, all points tonight. I thought you were going to be tired and like low energy. Man, you are all hitting all points. I was wondering if
3 cups of coffee.
I was wondering if anybody was going to catch the Shimi in the glass, because I think that 100% is what this is. Like, and that was the answer literally that I have written down on the. That is exactly the reason I think they did these side stories.
Person? It kills them.
Yes, and I think like we do know that all of this is tying up loose ends, expanding on some of the bigger lore. This is the first evidence that we see it that kind of, for me at least, that kind of explains that, like what happened to Shimi. Shimi is a beloved character in the series, and you're about to see he gets a lot of light in this comic. In this arc alone, we've already seen more Shimi than we did in the book, kind of thing. Okay, so I want to say that Robin is a Shimi lover, and this was like an attempt to kind of explain what happened in the end, because all the knowledge we had at the end of Shimi was he got cut by this glass because, he was talking to the beam. It was like a price he had to pay or something like that. But then he just kind of dies off screen, and they bury him and they move on, and I want to say this is her attempt at, like, kind of fixing like what had happened to that character, and we're gonna see there's gonna be some more that they're gonna touch base on that. But I'm gonna let Aaron talk before I do, but I do love this whole, like, the more inclusion of the magic and the prim, the gan. And I honestly, after reading it where we did, I want to say this is kind of the intended reading order, because, like, after reading the main series and getting these new elements of the information, he wants you to go read this series again, kind of thing. So he's kind of like adding these extra tidbits to take on that next reading of the Tower series, kind of thing. Aaron, what you got on all this?
I just say, like, I think, like, you could definitely tell Robin's from Steven's writing, and like, I don't know, like, I think there's just more poetry in Stephen King's writing, and Robin Firth is kind of more just getting the idea out there, or getting the plot out. But I still liked it. It's still written well, and it's like she keeps with all the slang words and everything. So it's not no worse than Stephen King's. I think it's on equal ground, but it's a different style for sure.
I want to say, as a reader, I really appreciate it because she's getting into heavy lore, and lore can be boring, and especially world building. I think she has a really good way of, like, getting the point across really quick in these, short story type segments, kind of thing. Another thing is like I kind of appreciate that she's not as descriptive as King is, because that's usually like it's one of my loves of King, but it's also one of like a big complaint a lot of people have is I got too far in description, you know.
He
I
runs on. He's got the run on
yes,
problem. He does that in Tommy Knockers. Bad.
yes, he does. So I really appreciate that style of her writing, that she kind of gets straight to it kind of thing, and it still does have the fantasy side, you know, it still fits, you know, it feels like this does fit in the world kind of thing. Um, so I do appreciate, you know, it is a different style, but it's not, as far as like a reader, I can say like if you go to Stephen King to Michael Crichton, it's two different style of writing. And if you're expecting like a
100%.
Stephen, you know, it's going to throw you off kind of thing. So getting a writer that can kind of flow and ebb with this other writer is really nice, you know. Um, especially on this level of like the conversations that had been backstage with Robin and Peter and Steven, you know, during this whole like, I think this is a big thing, 19 arcs. All right, so let's move on. So issue 5, Roland and Susan make love. Rhea's plans thwarted. Roland finds the oil at Sitco. Jonas goes to the Barquet, finds the guns. Latigo is told to go to Magus and collect the oil. Jonas finds the lookout. And then after that, we get the Laughing Mirror Part 2, tells the origin of Ray and how she gained a piece of the Laughing Mirror, became Ray of the Coos, selling her soul, extending her life. She makes a deal to stop Roland from having a child in Magus. Um, we also, in that same story, we get the Laughing Mirror Part 3, The Corruption of Jonas, short story of Eldris Jonas, origin as a boy, brought in to the Fardo Andreas house, raised with Court like as a brother. One day, stepping on a piece of the laughing mirror changes his whole identity, kind of thing, and then takes the test and fails, and is sent out east. And that is, and there is another Stephen King panel on that one, and there is like another, like, yeah, another side letter from Marvel to Stephen King, but nothing Dark Tower related. So we're going to focus on the two short stories in the comic. Again, in this issue, there's nothing really new as far as the comic goes. It's pretty much what we got in the books, kind of thing. But then we get to the Laughing Mirror, you know, part 2 and 3, which explain it kind of goes into that, you know, why the 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 need to explain these two evils. Personally, I loved both these stories, like the Rhea and Jonas. They lined up with what, you know, I knew of these characters. I want to say with Jonas, I kind of felt like I would have been more in line with that, like him seeing the grapefruit and him getting a vision of the future changed his perspective. But as far as what we got, it doesn't deter it. I like that, you know, he does step on the glass kind of thing, and that he just changes into an outright dick kind of thing. Especially with the way the story starts out, because he's not an orphan, but he's with the bad family. He's taken in. I like that part of the story. Like, I really like that part of the story because it kind of explains that not all the gunslingers were nobility kind of thing. That some were brought in from outside sources, and we did have other gunslingers like this. And this Andreas Fordor, he is mentioned one time in the first series. And it's when he's talking to Jonas, he does mention his teacher, so it's not something that was great. You know, this storyline I think was part of like the original idea kind of thing. What are your thoughts on either story, the Rhea or the Jonas? You know, I go with you, Phil.
I mean, I don't have anything else really to add that I haven't said before
Yeah,
with it.
before.
Yeah. I do prefer the Jonas story to the Rhea story. I mean, that's really all I else I have to add. I do think, though, with the main story, I do think that there was one important factor. I think it was in this issue that it wasn't necessarily an addition to the story, but it made me, especially when you talk about how the L hated you didn't want to use the machines of the past, that made it just so much more, I guess you could say, sinister what their plans were to me. When they're talking about, is this in the book where they actually showed the old tank? Or am I thinking of a future issue?
The old tank, as far as like the tankers.
Yeah,
It
no,
shows that.
Oh.
It shows. It's in this book.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the big tank,
yeah, because to me
a
it's showing.
military piece of equipment, one with a big gun on the top of it.
Yeah, I mean,
Tank.
yeah, you've got here's literally a machine from the
Built
old
for
world.
war.
So you could see that not only are they necessarily against the white, it's a strike against the Eld, and it's just something that didn't. Yeah, and it's beautifully done. It's
Yeah.
something
You
that,
want a
believe it
gun?
or not,
We'll
hadn't
give you a
clicked
gun.
when I was reading it. Yeah.
Well, it kind of leads into the this is one of the additions I do like and I do appreciate about the comic because it is mentioned that Farson had these machines. They never explained what the machines were, that they just needed the oil and he could use it kind of thing. He had figured out how to refine it. But it's elements like this, like actually like that's the machine that he had, that paints it like a way bigger picture, like as far as like this massive war that went down between Farson and the last line of gunslingers kind of thing. I will say that there is some of that within the book because we have what is it in the drawing of the three, when they run into the TikTok man and stuff, they find that old like World War II, and I think that's what this is just layering on
Yeah.
those things that have been misplaced at a time kind of thing. And Farson just has, honestly, Farson's like, if I had to sum up his like who in comparison, he's modeled after, he reminds me of Adolf. The way that Adolf was focused on, you know, new sciences and mystical sciences. Farson kind of, especially the way he's explained and looks, and he's using these technology out of time. We see he's got tanks, and it kind of like lines up with that, kind of thing. And it's funny because it does have the Nazi ties or whatever.
Yeah, and I think that's by King's design. I
Mhm.
mean, yeah, here's the you're literally sprinkling in the ultimate evil in history, world
Yeah,
history,
yeah, how do you have this
into
like
your characters.
multi-connected omniverse and you don't feature the worst bad guys in history kind of thing
Yeah.
in some form or fashion. Anybody got anything they want to add to these two side stories before I move on? Aaron, Steve.
I just like the visualization of it all. That's about all I'd add. Is I like the way Rhea looked and Farson and everything.
Yeah, I like how they explained her being such an evil child, and how the mirror just added when she got nailed in the eye with it
Mm.
right there.
Yeah,
Yeah, and then it just made her, have the magical powers, and she explored that part of Gan or
I
the
liked her
Crim.
whole like princess game and the whole like
Exactly.
she had like mutated frogs and like she was so detested she couldn't have interaction with the regular people because by that time she'd pissed everybody off and they didn't want nothing to do with her. Either that or they feared her, and
Yeah,
because there's talk about she cursed a whole village and
she
um
kept doing that over and over everywhere she went.
Yeah, I'll
yeah.
say this though. Functionally, both of the short stories kind of reminded me of you if you collected back in the day the Marvel Universe Series 1 cards, where
Mhm.
I think they had like 6 of them that were supposed to be the origin story in one card.
Card form, yeah.
Yeah, this was of course a different tone and much more information. The way that they ended each of these stories, where you have the portrait of who they were and who they wind up when we see them at this point in the story, kind of reminded me of that type of stuff, like a profile.
It kind of does in a way,
Yeah.
like stat cards, kind of thing. Like, and I could totally see that because especially with these, I will say once we get to the set, I want to say it's the second arc, they start doing like a more like because these we just got like little bitty short stories, and I want to say as we go along, it's more like we get part one, part two, part three, it's more like a connected short story. But I want to say yes, this one does feel a lot like that, like character stat cards, like hey, here's Jonas from the book, here's Rhea, here's some character, a lot of the characters that they featured in the series kind of thing. All right, so moving on to issue 6, we got Cuthbert receives a message from Shimi. Roy kills Thorn. We got they frame the boys. The boys get captured. They are freed by Susan and Shimi. The boys head to Sitco and start blowing up the tankers to get the attention of the bad guys, and then Jonas goes for the grapefruit. In the side stories, we get Chayu Tree Part 1 tells a story of a dead midworld and people gasping at straws, trying to fix the world in a town. Brockist, Merlin comes and tells the people to fix the world, they need to start doing a basically a fire sacrifice. Um, they start doing this in All World, and All World starts healing. Bonfires are born and start practiced around the world where they just start burning people. And then the last side story in this is a Gunslinger Guns. It's a breakdown of the guns used by gunslingers, apprentice, novice gunslinger, and the guns of Deshane. And that is the 6th issue. Um, not really any questions on this issue. I want to say like I really do like the Chayu Tree the side story kind of thing. I want to say it's the next Chayu Tree side story. That's the one I want to talk about. But I actually love like that Merlin came to this town and did his chaos thing, and he's like, hey, you know what's gonna fix the world? Like, that this and honestly, I mean, in history, I kind of see it lining up the same way where these people that did sacrifices. There was some guy that was like, you know what'll fix things? Let's start sacrificing that guy right there. Like, um, any thoughts on the Chayu Tree or the comic? This issue didn't really feature anything new. I will say that. I will say there is a decrease in this issue because it has one of my favorite scenes. It's the scene with Susan and Shimi, and they go to rescue the boys. It's such a dope scene in the book. Um, I will say this is more like a decreased version because Shimi's not really present, and he's in the beginning, and then she goes in there, and it's pretty much she just kills the guys and then rescue the boys. Um, but it's not. It's just they don't feature his part of the story. So that's why I say it's more like a decreased scene. Um, but any thoughts on the Chayu Tree or the comic in general? And Phil, let me go with you first.
The only thing that at this point, because there's another point I want to bring up in the next Chayu Tree story, that it made me think, and I couldn't quite figure it out. When we see the Chayu Tree in this story, we know that this is pretty much a town that is controlled by the Red, for lack of a better example. In this short story, do we know what has happened to the town that they're talking about? Or what happened? Well, Gilead fell. I know that. Well, that's the next story. But my point is it that Chayu Tree only exists in itself in Red leading towns?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so in this side story, they do explain, like, because it's like multiple the side stories before this that kind of explained it, but they were explaining when Arthur L, like before he was made king and he came into like creation or whatever and like appeared and like he started basically cleaning up all world. Okay, so during his time, like it said that like that's when they were facing the worst mutations, that the world was dying or whatever. And then he comes into practice after he kills Satyr and like and develops the guns. And that's around, we haven't got to that yet, but that's around the
Right.
times when he develops the gunslingers. But that's when all world starts fixing to a degree. I'm not gonna say, but that kind of explains like what the world was going. That's why the need of the sacrifice, because that's why I said they were grasping at straws, because it's explained in the side story that they were trying like the same rituals they had been, like they were praying to
The different
Ariza.
gods.
Right.
Yeah, and the gods just weren't listening. Merlin comes in and like basically, hears and sees what they're saying and uses that against them. He's like, hey, these gods are dead. They're not, but that's
They're
what
not
he's
going to
telling
listen to
them.
you, but if you kill people, then these guys will listen and they'll fix it for you.
Right. Like I was trying to say, is that because of the affiliation with the Red, that this land itself needs blood. You know, again,
Eh,
you're thinking further into the books too. You know, you've got vampires involved. You see, there's a thing with Rhea, you know, with blood and everything. That's the other thing I was kind of like stuck on.
I like how
no,
they
and
just explain this, that they wanted to explain why they did the fires in the first place so they could burn Susan and
Mhm.
explain all that good stuff.
Mhm.
Story. Go.
But I will
Easy.
say you're absolutely right, because this town we know is predominantly controlled by the Red. It's the first, like, I mean, besides Toll, and Toll's a whole different beast because it is like a trap set up for Roll. But okay, so in the story, this is the first town that Roland really comes across that is like, has a lot of bad elements, because pretty much is controlled by Farson and Jonas. And so I want to say that that's like, it's just leading into that this is a bad, city kind of thing. And
Mm-hmm.
after, I want to assume, because we don't get that either, but I want to assume that after what Roland did with Magus, that, it went back to the white side, because we do know that that was the last refire burning. They do say that in the book, that was the last time someone burned Magus. And they do mention in this side story that well, it's the next one, that like there is a reasoning why the bonfires were kind of like, I mean, like not so well received, because in the beginning of the story, they weren't planning on burning a person. They were doing exactly what they said in the side
Yeah.
story. They were creating those stuffy guys, and they were going to burn that. And this was all like the Red took over and the angry mob stuff. And you know Steve, Aaron, what you got?
Yeah, I got nothing to add to that.
I'm thinking too, they were talking about um, losing my train of thought. Okay, so the Coos was told by, well, she wanted to extend her life. So to extend her life, part of the bargain was is she had to kill Susan and the child, and she needed to use the some way to do it. And it's interesting how they were always having this human sacrifice, and then people were just using the stuffies as a representative because the eld had stopped that. But then the people got pissed; they did it even more. So then he said, "Okay, we're going to do it by lottery." And then there's a whole, I think that's towards the last book where they start talking about the lottery and
Yeah,
what
that's the
happens
next one.
with,
Yeah.
That's the
with
next
that
one.
one.
You're skipping. You're skipping.
I'm skipping ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we could look. Let's touch base, because we got 30 minutes anyway. So issue 7, and then let me find out. I lost my place. Where's
Seven.
the sucker? Issue
Coolest
7.
cover.
Susan gets captured. Yeah, I love it. It's one of my favorite from the series. That's the one that I wanted Jay to sign. All right, Susan gets captured. And Chimi follows. Um, kind of due to Chimi, or let's just say Ka. Roland and his Tet mow down Jonas and his crew, gain the grapefruit. Roland, Rhea makes a pact with Cordelia. Roland tricks, traps, and kills Latigo and his 200 men. Roland touches and is lost in the grapefruit, and that's where the comic book series ends, in this first arc. And then we get the side stories in issue 7. We get the Chayu Tree Part 2. Tells the story of Arthur Eld, Queen Riona, and I'm probably saying it wrong, and Emanuela Deshane, a Reapstone wizard. The queen is tricked, and the Eld sires a spider baby. Um, then we also get, no, that's it. That's it. And there is like there's, and all these they do feature like sketches, and I didn't mention that either. But in this one, features like the most sketches and some of the covers, that kind of thing. What's up, Cash and Dad? Thanks for stopping by. All right, so now we can get there. No, I'm playing. So we get to this. Okay, this was my favorite side story out of all of them. I mean, you're talking about the story that we get on the first like Chayu tree, like when they actually finally birthed like a good human being, and they had like 3 options, and they chose the like dumb, pretty looking, kid to burn. That, like, you talk about sad touch, like, bro, like heartfelt, and like, out of all the things they could have sacrificed, like, you pick, one of the hell, like, I mean, it's what they wanted, but like, man, like, but then we get to the lottery and the whole, like, Queen Riona, and she is brought up in the stories of Arthur Eld in the books, like, but there's not a lot. Okay, so we find out that, like, you know some of the descendant between Arthur Eld and the Deshane family line, how, because in this side story in the series, the Deshane family line is kind of taken that it's from the Eld, and it's just changed names as we've progressed. This paints a different picture where Arthur Eld was, their family was separate, and the Deshanes were a completely different, because we find out that the original Deshane was one of Arthur Eld's, like, closely loved lieutenants, kind of thing, and his daughter actually becomes one of, Arthur Eld's, like, concubine, kind of thing. um how does that, did that add anything into your thinking, into Roland, that kind of thing? What's up, Rich? Thanks for stopping by. Phil, we're going with you because to me, this was kind of one of the bigger pieces of information. I had always taken it that Roland was like a direct descendant of Arthur Eld, kind of thing. And we do find out he is,
Yeah.
but just in a different form, fashion, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I thought it was interesting that they decided to draw that well, there's a couple interesting things that happen in here. First, up until this point, and look, I'm not the biggest Arthurian expert, but you kind of think of Arthur as, oh, he's this all good guy. He never made a bad decision. When you find out he was actually very flawed, and there's nothing that brings you more closer to that than when he accidentally impregnates a giant insect person. I like that it added the whole connection to Mordred. I like how. Oh, I got off the question. I'm sorry. I do like that. Yes, they drove the bread. Because of Arthur's mistake, his bloodline is forever tied to the red, whether he likes it or not. Whereas, the gunslingers, although they're not DNA-wise related to him, through the guns and the gunslingers and everything, that's their connection with him.
Aaron, what you got? What you got, buddy?
Yeah, I like going deeper and deeper into lore. Like, it's definitely a positive for me the more I can learn about it.
All
But
this
yeah, like,
addition to the lore, did you like, did this line up with your?
yeah, actually, I think even more so, really, like, adding more, like, uh, yeah, I'd say it it just adds, enhances. That's the word I'm looking for. It enhances.
I agree. Steve, any thoughts on all this?
Yeah, I like how they explain how the Disjane family comes into being and how Roland's family was created in the first place. A little bit of the backstory, in case people don't know, Merlin had a little entourage of insect people that were converted to humans, and they came into Arthur Eld's court, and they caused a bunch of chaos with that mirror and corrupted everybody. And it was one of the Disjanes that saw what was going on and stopped all that nonsense from happening in the first place. And they were still kind of corrupted from that after the fact. So, like they said, Arthur was flawed. The guy's flawed, right? So
he was, and I actually appreciate that, because the way he's presented in the novel is just this ultimate form of good, which he is. But I mean, it's good to see that your heroes are flawed in different ways, kind of thing.
yeah, he's
Anybody
king.
catch?
He makes bad decisions. He's the king, and he's got a wife who's barren. So then he's got to have the gillies on the side to try and have a child, and that happens to be the daughter of this Jane, who he ends up having a child with, and then that line continues, right? Even though his wife is barren. That's pretty cool, though. It's a nice twist.
So we get to the end of the story, right? And you had mentioned the spider baby, right? And the way that's brought out. I wanted to talk about thoughts after that story, right? Put yourself in that place and time, and put yourself down there with the people, looking up at Arthur L. And he brings up this baby. They're waiting to see this baby, right? And he brings up this baby, and it's just a sack full of like spider pieces, right? Because his man have already, cut the spider down, and like he throws the spider pieces down there. Okay, now we don't get any more story after this. Now we're about to get some more arcs and stuff. So does that paint a picture for art? How do you think these people like? I mean, you think about all the kings and queens situations that have come up in different media and stuff like that. Like, this is a hard sell for your people. Like, I mean, you bring out this baby, you're supposed to be revealing whether it's a boy and girl, and lo and behold, he throws these spider pieces at you, and you're supposed to be up there like, man, I love this king. He is just, I mean, like, where do you see the story of Arthur L going from this point, kind of thing?
Well, I mean, I like that this did humanize him more, because in my mind he's saying, hey, look, Charcuterie, I hated the idea of Charcuterie. I decided to go with this, and you guys are demanding this. This is just as much as on you that it's on me. This is what your bloodthirstiness and your chanting resulted in. Here, take all this. I mean, from there, I would think one of two things are going to happen. Either the people are going to do a 180 on him and hate him, or it's just going to be kind of like, and that's why we don't do Charcuterie anymore.
I love that you brought up that with the people and the child tree, and him being the one like standard in the story against it. Like, and he brings the spider baby pieces, and he's like, "This is what you get for what you wanted," And like, what a bold king, I mean, like, you don't see that in representation too often,
And I'll say this, even though it's not officially part of the novelizations, if and when they get this Amazon series off the ground, this is like the most Game of Thrones moment in the entire series. And this is like, okay, I could see this on the screen. Just that shock, like, yeah, this is what you did.
All these side stories, like, I mean, just like a collection, and then them done in like a TV form fashion or something, man, they would be so good. Like Reyes would be really good, the Chayu tree and stuff, the whole lot, the concept of the lottery, and like, I do like the wizard coming in and like tricking, doing the whole like, tricking Queen Rihanna to replace the stone kind of thing. Honestly, reminded me of like a Hunger Games style thing that they had set up, trying to do this lottery. And Aaron, did it?
Well, what was that?
I was gonna repeat the question. Did it, change your perspective, kind of thing, or how do you
No,
think
it
it's
didn't
gonna?
change my perspective, but I guess I just widened it. Um, yeah, I just realized there's more to the story.
Talk about opening up like a small side story into like this bigger mystery kind of thing.
Yeah, it'd be cool to see all that live action, like you said, too.
I also think it
Steve?
kind of Arthur didn't want to take a gilly in the first place because he loved his wife, and the fact that they demand that of him, that's another thing. I think that's one of his human things. He was so pissed. He goes, yeah, see what happens when I take a gilly, and look at all the shit that happened, and he's throwing it down in disgust, because that's one of his human moments where he's just, he's pissed, and he's sick of all the pomp and circumstance. Like, he just wanted the one wife, not having all these stupid gillies because he's got to procreate, right? I like to look
Yeah,
at it from that perspective.
I like all that. I like in these small, short stories. Well, I say small, but they're still pretty thick. But
Yeah.
even the small amount of information we got on Arthur L, I'd love, it just paints like a realistic version of a character kind of thing versus like just a small amount of myths or mentions that we got before kind of thing. Like it does, to me, it always added to the background lore that was there that being a reader of the Dark Tower series, I wanted like more of Gilead and how the gunslingers looked at that time. It's kind of my same opinion of Star Wars with Empire and Return and being that kid and being like, man,
Yeah.
what did it look like with all the Jedis in the past, fighting the Sith? And of course we got that eventually, but you know I
Well,
go
if you
ahead.
think about it, it is a cautionary kind of tale.
Mhm.
If they're tying it into, because this whole chain of events from Arthur sleeping with the insect people to his wife giving into her murderous intentions and everything, even to the crowd, it all is basically off of temptation. The whole reason that this happened is because Arthur, the queen, and yes, the crowd was tempted by different things, and that's when evil was able to just kind of slither in and say, "Okay, I got you."
I like it. I like it. I do have one last question. So with all these side stories and stuff, one thing that like kind of stands out is it's done in like a fairy tale kind of fashion. Like you're reading like a new version of Mother Goose or something like that, or the Brother Grimms. Um, did did y'all get that feeling as well, and why do it in this form and fashion?
Yeah, I kind of got that feeling because it kind of seemed like, like how we were told, like, Midworld always told their history through stories. So it's kind of like stories that were passed down, and that's what kind of makes it have that, fairy tale kind of feel.
I like that. Phil?
Um, it didn't really hit me, to be honest with you, as far as fairy tales go. I mean, yeah, there's different fantasy elements, but the entire time, not so much with these backstories, but more of this is how the world was made. It kind of made me think more of the old world kind of creation stories, like the stuff that we used to kind of read in high school. Um, yeah, not necessarily a Grimm's fairy tale type of thing for me.
Steve?
Yeah, me neither. I'm not. Yeah, it's not more of a grim fairy tale. I don't see it like that either.
I liked it as far as like what Aaron was touching base as far as the stories were passed down, and we do know that stories have a lot of meaning. I think the overall like concepts of the side stories about like temptation, redemption, those kind of things line up with the big predominant words within the books. Um that like as far as like the way I originally came across them, I think they did come off as like I always like kind of envision the side stories being read by Gabrielle to Roland, and that's how like we know, because the reference of him reading The Wind in the Keyhole and stuff like that. I always envision that's what these side stories are, or like how we the reader are coming across them kind of thing, like who's telling us these stories kind of thing. Um, I don't know. Anybody else that got anything they want to add to all seven? What'd you think of this overall arc? Like, this first arc, as far as where they started, how it fit into what you know, and where you think this series is going to go. I mean, the Wizard of Glass part, but
You mean the backstories you're talking, which way they're going to go, or?
nah, really the main comic. The backstories are going to be hard. I don't think you'll be able to guess that direction, especially with the next arc, and they got some crazy stuff coming.
Well, the comic itself, from what I've heard, it's going to fill in a lot of these things that are referred to in the novelization. There we go, words. Like I really want to read about the Fall of Gilead. I'm interested in seeing that. Um, I had a question that kind of spurred from this whole thing because yes, this felt like a condensed version of the book that we read. I don't know that I would have enjoyed this book as much as I hadn't have read the books themselves. But I don't know that I would have enjoyed the comic as much if I read the books themselves, because I think the way that they try to go about it, where here you're introduced, they started with one of the best openings, I think, in modern day novelization. You chase the man in black into the desert, and it kind of says, yeah, this is the guy that you know or you should know, but this is about him. Like, it kind of felt like a bit of a jump for me there, where I was questioning, is this story or is this series strictly for Dark Tower fans, or is it designed to say, hey, if you've never read them before, jump in? And King even kind of answers that question in one of the panels. And I can say I don't know that it would have been for me had I not read the novels.
Yeah, that's true. Like I always wondered if we would find somebody who has never read the books, get them to read the comic books, and see if they get the synopsis of the books from just reading the comics and have never read any of the books. Because we don't have that luxury though, because we've already read the books. So then reading the comics, it enhances it for us. But it's hard to try to detach your brain and say, okay, forget all those books and just read these and think of these as standalones and what would they mean.
Yeah, because if you judge Roland off of just what we've seen in the comics now, there's no understanding that, hey, he's going to be the man one day. He's going to be the guy who does everything. And while it certainly leads to greater things for the character, I don't know that hadn't I not read this, that this would have pulled me in. He's very kind of vanilla right now.
Yeah,
It was when I was reading this, and it not the first time I read this, because the first time I read this is when it was released. I bought it issue to issue, but and it heavily Dark Tower, wanting at that time. Okay, so reading this time and going through it and dissecting it kind of thing. That was one of the questions I asked, was if I handed this trade to a new reader that had no knowledge on the Dark Tower, could they even read this series? Would it make sense to them? And I don't think it does. I think that, I think you'd be able to get a picture, but I think there's a lot of it left out where, I think this is specifically for the fans that have read these novels. And, I think that any reader would be able to pick this up and maybe piece it together kind of thing, but I think there's a lot missing, from the overall story to get you invested in the series if you have no knowledge on the Dark Tower kind of thing.
I think that's why they released the book, the Gunslinger's Guidebook, with this comic book series, because if you read the guidebook, it kind of helps you.
Yeah.
I was even trying to put myself in the perspective as, let's say that when they publish the novelizations, that this was the first chapter, where you're not starting with Roland where he is, you're starting with him right now. Would they have gotten that far into the story? And again, I don't see that I would have necessarily been pulled into the story had they started it right here.
Yeah, they need to start it more to the beginning, do a lot of his history and expand on that more. Build the characters, like they do in all comic books, slowly build the story to it. Or give it some serious action first and then do the character building.
And this one, all that is kind of absent. There's no reason to be connected to Susan. There's no, they're missing all those elements, because it is the sped up version. But it's kind of like you have a little more connection with Shimi and Jonas and some of the other ones that do get a little more light in the series versus Roland and Sue, because Roland and Susan is just.
I think story wise, a new reader would definitely be lost. But I think just because of the visuals and the story, they would also be intrigued at the same time.
I
kind of a double-edged sword.
Yeah, it is. I could agree to that amount, that somebody would find this and be intrigued by the art and some of the story enough to be, well, let me check out the novels kind of thing. I could actually see that, and I don't see that a lot from like a game to movie, or that that kind of push. But I can see that here as somebody finding this and seeing a little bit about what the Dark Tower is, and
But it's
being
definitely not like a superhero book. So,
Oh, of course,
no,
yeah.
no,
you
no.
know, it
I
has to be the
almost,
right person to read it.
I almost think it would have been more approachable to a new reader, is if instead of starting with, "Hey, this is Roland. He's going to be a big important guy one day," but first read this. It would have almost started at the end of the series, where you're seeing Roland go into the tower and go into the rooms and start to relive parts of his past, and then you have a reason now to be sucked into that story, other than now you know the rest of the story.
That'd be a good narrative. That'd work.
Because this, okay, so with this medium, and this goes into my very last question I'm going to ask my esteemed panel, but so with this medium, we do have a layout of how they might have done the Dark Tower series slash movie slash whatever they want, Okay, because in this, for instance, we did kind of start in the beginning at the Gunslinger, and we saw two different scenes because we get the man, the man in black and fled across the desert scene, and then it jumps forward to the, Hawk scene, him becoming the Gunslinger, which is from the Gunslinger, and then it jumps to the Wizard of Glass stuff. A lot of people, my boy down here, thinks this is how they should do the series, exactly in this form and format, like where they start with a little bit of the Gunslinger, and they jump, with just these two scenes, and they jump to Wizard and Glass, and then they, kind of go backwards and tell the rest of the series. Is that the way, this form and fashion, is that the way that you think a TV series or movie would work if they started this way, or do you think it should be told Gunslinger and drawing of the two, blah, 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 blah?
I don't agree. I don't think you could start here. I think that, and there's been plenty of examples of linear TV series where you've gotten a big fan base and then they go back to explain things.
I agree. I don't think it would have the same impact as it would if you read it in timeline.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I think this is a story that should be told if they're doing the overall series, but
Yeah.
not right out the gate.
Yeah, I think it should start with book one.
Yeah.
Steve?
Yeah, I'm just playing it over my head and trying to think of how I would do it. And my brain keeps going back to Game of Thrones.
But if they did, I'm sorry. But if they did do it, I'd want them to do it 300 style, how they used Frank Miller's actual comic for the storyboards of the movie. That's how I would want them to do it if they did this.
How so, though?
Well, like with the atmosphere and the color, like especially in the background colors and all, the silhouettes, like just the visuals, like,
the visuals that we got here added with the live action effect.
if they did it, I would want the same visuals that are in the book.
See, that could work for a movie, just specifically like with the colors, because and the only thing I could kind of equate it to is if you think of some of the earlier like Steven Soderbergh films where he just had that kind of different lens that gave all his movies a different look. I can't see that for an ongoing series though, and I think that this is a story as you guys have seen, and probably what I've heard of from what you guys have said, this is a story that you just can't simply do in one film.
I don't believe so, and I believe
there's too much. There's too much.
I believe them. I mean, they attempted and tried, and it's just. I think maybe possibly. I'm not saying it's impossible. I don't believe in the impossibility, but it would take like a super genius to like be able to condense it down to one film. Even the Gunslinger, and the Gunslinger being one of the smaller books, there's just so much information that's in that book. Like,
you're gonna have 8 movies or more. At least it's good for a franchise.
Well, I was gonna say they could do that. They could do 8 movies, but they couldn't do the whole thing in one.
I would even be good with part 1, part 2, and there's like
like Lord of the Rings.
movies, No, but my preferred would be TV form, and at this point, honestly, I'd be fine with animation or live action. I want
No, I want
live
live
act.
action.
Yeah,
I
live
want
action.
live action, but but animation does tend to stay with the source, so I'd be happy with that too. At first, I want live action, but from the attempt we got, I just I'm still waiting for the live action version, kind of thing.
They
I'll
need
say
Game of
this.
Thrones money.
I'll say this: the Roku channel, I think, has popped up with the film itself. I think I saw the picture in the little menu screen, so I might attempt to check it out. In theory,
Okay, I'm gonna say
I I
in
watched the
talks of the
movie, but
film. I'm gonna say I like the film. It's not, and this comes from a person that likes Morbius. This comes from a person that liked
it's just a
Borderlands.
whole different wheel. That's how you got to look at that
It
movie.
is.
It's a whole separate wheel.
It is, and that's the way I viewed it. I will say there's parts of the movie that I love, like Matthew McConaughey's Man in Black. I do love that. You know, like Idris Elba, I think he performs
I
really
love
well.
how Roland reloads.
hmm I think they do pull off some things really well within the film. As far as it story wise, that's the negative. Just it's not anything like related. I mean, it kind of is, but not anything that you're gonna recognize, and that's the only thing I can say to it. As far as it being an okay
I think
film,
the best
yeah,
way I could explain it is just a sprinkle from each book,
yeah,
all
mhm,
put into one
hmm.
it kind of
short
is.
movie.
I'll say this though, based off of what we read in the novels here, I am looking forward to the Salem's Lot series on Max. I think that comes out next month.
Oh, me too. Yeah,
And,
Okay, so
Salem's Lot is great.
I would highly suggest reading the book first. Not that they've done like they've proved with this story they can do good versions of Salem's Lot. The original like 70s movie was good. They did a like um they've done like two side shows. Like they did one called Salem's Lot, like, and they've done another one called I think Jerusalem's Lot. And don't quote me on the names of the shows, but this will be like the fourth time.
mhm.
But I want to say that it's kind of a story where they do it pretty well at this point
And I
in
think
Hollywood.
Midnight Mass is a prequel.
Yes, it is with Andrew Brolin. I think it is. I
Yeah,
might be
it's
wrong
gonna
about
be
that.
it's gonna be one of those things.
And if
If
you
you
haven't watched Midnight Mass, you need to watch Midnight Mass because the creator is who is got the rights to the Dark Towers. So if we get something, that's where it's coming from.
I was gonna
Okay.
say, if I get to watch it, it's going to be solo late at night. Just if you've heard me talk before,
Yeah,
my
You
yeah.
might
kids.
be surprised. You're definitely not your kids, but
Oh
your
no.
wife might like it.
Well, here's the thing. We had I've alluded to this before. I'm not going to spell it out here. When we moved into this house, we had an issue, we'll say, with rhymes with toast. And as a direct result, my wife will not watch anything even related to anything that creeps her out at night.
I
And
got you. I
it's
got you.
put a severe dent kind of in our watching stuff. We still haven't finished Stranger Things just because she stopped watching it when she was pregnant, and now during the day when the kids are up, we can't be like, "Hey guys, go in the other room. We're gonna watch a show that you can't watch yet."
Don't worry, all this stuff will be
Yeah,
there. There's no rush.
I know. Yeah,
Understandable. It's
Yeah,
a good
because
show though.
especially in that situation, I totally get that new home. It could be kind of creepy, kind of thing.
yeah.
You got kids in the house, that's new. I don't know. Thoughts on the series overall, though. Like especially like okay, I didn't even ask this, but Steven and Aaron, did y'all read this when it dropped? Your initial thoughts on the series. Phil, you as the new reader reading it now, kind of thing.
I mean, like I said,
Um,
I'm anxious to get to the new content. All this stuff is great recap, um, but I want to get into the stuff that we kind of haven't seen yet.
okay, and it'll be coming more.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
I didn't get these comic books until way later after they were all released.
Me too. Yeah,
Shame.
Stumbled on them.
Shame.
I got them from Ollie's.
Yep, because I was in the middle of Kid World and school and all the crap that goes with it. So I was out of comics at the time. So it was the time that actually I went to a comic book store with the kids when they were old enough to read, and they were picking out their manga and whatever. And I happened to stumble across these, and I went, "Holy crap!" So I had to start picking them up, and then that got me back into rereading the books again right after I read through the comic books as I was.
I would rate it personally like a 9. I liked it a lot.
Yeah.
This I got off of Amazon on Prime Day for half off. But they did just open in Ollie's within an hour from me. So that might be, if I could find a reason to say, hey, I'm going to be gone for like 2-3 hours, I might check it out.
And I was surprised to find a lot of these books in dollar bins. And then all of a sudden they took off in price. Like some of them are really expensive to get.
Yes, I used to find them in like 50-cent bins. I used to have stores give them to me because they couldn't, they just had mass supply of them and stuff. And I've actually given the series to like other dark, because a lot of dark fans, they don't even know that this comic book exists. It's not advertised in the books or anything, unless you.
And it should be for how much it explains and how much it really opens up the entire franchise.
Like, hey, you might want to check out the series if you like this book, kind of thing.
I think I may have had or read the Marvel preview back in the day when they put those out of it, but that was about it.
I think that's that book that Steve recently got, that Marvel Spotlight, and you might have seen that or whatever. And I mean, because it was briefly advertised, but I think I don't even remember how I came across the series. If I was like on Stephen King's website, and that's how I found out. Because I can tell you at this time I was not big into Marvel comics, so I can't even tell you a book in 2007 that I was reading under Marvel besides this. Like, and I had to go to special stores to get this, the whole series when it dropped, kind of thing. It wasn't just, not every shop had it. It would, like it says, limited series. It was a limited series, kind of. But guys, this is the episode. I think we've talked about this series quite a bit. I think we did it justice, kind of thing. I really enjoyed the series. I enjoyed, like, I predominantly can remember the first 7 of these arcs, and I enjoyed like all of them a lot. And they do get a lot better as we go forward, because once we get past the next arc does have new stuff like this one, but it's really that the third arc is when it's I think it starts with treachery. We get new gunslingers. It gets really into it. But that is my episode. I want to thank my esteemed panel for all their thoughts, opinions, in the Dark Tower series, because it is a thick beast. Everybody that showed up, that stayed with us, kind of thing, and provided the support, guys. But we will be back in 2 weeks to talk about the next arc, which is the Long Road Home, explaining specifically what happens to Roland when he gets sucked into the grapefruit, which is a fantastic time in the series. But guys, that's all I got for you. Basically say bye, long days, pleasant nights. We'll see y'all in 2 weeks.
Power.